everyone, welcome back to another video. Thank you so much for tuning back into the channel, and if you're new here, welcome to the channel. My name is Pooja and I talk about books and stuff like that. So before we get started with the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and if you would like to, please leave a comment. So let's get started with today's video. So as you know from the title, today I'm going to be talking about a few fantasy series that I am excited to read, hopefully at some point this year, but I'm not making this a video about like series I'm excited to read in 2021 because I don't know how quickly I will get to all of them. So the reason I wanted to make this video was because I have actually made a video in the past where I talked about how I don't actually like fantasy, and I will play that up here real quick.
Literally everybody loves high fantasy. Everyone's like obsessed with it. People are always reading all these like adventure quest books with like dragons in them and stuff, and I'm just not into that. I don't love high fantasy books.
Yeah. So yeah. So here's the thing. I think I so far have encountered sort of like two main types of readers in my friend circles, and this is not an exhaustive list for sure. I'm sure there's other types of readers out there, but these are like the ones that I encounter the most. And one is you've got these people that like read books that are interesting and provocative and talk about some part of like history or a different part of the world, and like they use them as like more of an educational thing. And then there's a lot of people who use them purely as entertainment. And those types of people tend to enjoy more of like fantasy and sci-fi and just more of the typical like fiction type of books, versus that first group is generally the ones that are going to be reading more like nonfiction, memoirs, books that sort of highlight some kind of interesting concept or something like that, etc. And then I think there's obviously people who like kind of mix between those two groups, and I feel like I used to fall sort of squarely on the side of people who would read like memoirs and nonfiction and like literary fiction books that are supposed to broaden your mind and stuff like that. But I kind of thought about how when I was a kid, I used to enjoy all these fantasy series a lot and read them a ton, and I haven't really done that in a while and just kind of have stayed away from the adult fantasy genre generally. And I thought, you know, why not give it a shot? Maybe this will just be like some interesting books that I will enjoy. And I feel like my January has been a little bit chiller than most months have been in the past, so I was like, okay, I have some time, might as well try it out. And now I have found myself really enjoying fantasy books. So I think I'm going to try to weave them into my reading a little more often, just as like a respite from some of the more heavy books that I tend to regularly read. So that was the impetus for making this video, and now I'm going to be talking about a couple of fantasy series that I'm excited to read. So the first one that we've got here, which I've already picked up from the library, is the City of Brass trilogy by S.A. Chakraborty, and I've already read the first book in this series, which is The City of Brass. And this basically, I know the synopsis of this series because I've read the first book, but it follows this girl named Nari who is living in the human world in Cairo and gets caught up in this very vast magical world that takes place in the past, and she goes to this new kingdom called Daevabad, and I think the trilogy is actually called the Daevabad trilogy. And it's basically this magical world with beings that are what humans consider jinns, but they actually occupy this vast world with its own politics, and she actually ends up being the heir to one of the leaders from that magical world and gets kind of caught up in all of it, and there's like adventures and stuff like that. And I kind of raced through the first book. I literally read it in like one day, so it was very fast. And I'm super excited to read the second two books. And I think what was surprising to me, because this is honestly one of the first adult fantasy series that I've ever read, was like, it's the same type of magic world-esque stuff that you see in children's fantasy, but there's like murder and just like heavy topics. And it's just like, it's a cool mix of like adult topics, but in fantasy worlds. So I'm kind of enjoying that aspect of it. So this series has been fantastic so far, and I'm hoping to hopefully get through all of it in the next week or so. So this one will be a pretty quick one for me, and I'm excited to do a quick review of this on the channel later on. The second series that I'm super excited to read is the War Trilogy by R.F. Kuang. Obviously, this is one I've watched so many videos about on Booktube, and I'm sure you have seen them as well. I'm not too sure exactly what the premise is, but I know that the basics are that it's kind of based on ancient Chinese mythology, and kind of takes place around the time of the rape of Nanking, I believe, and some of that may be incorrect entirely, but I think that's kind of what the premise is, and it follows a main character named Rin, and it's supposedly very, an amazing book, and it's actually written by, and the author is actually like literally my age, so I think that'll be cool to read a book by someone who's like only 23 or 24 years old, and like she's already accomplished so much, and that's awesome. And I would love to support that and kind of read the world that she's built up. So I'm very excited about that. I think it'll be a really interesting journey to read a fantasy series based on a mythology that I'm not super familiar with, but and get to just experience that world. So I'm very excited about that as well. And then the third series that I'm super excited to read is the 5th Season trilogy by N.K. Jemisin. Again, I don't know too much about this series, but I just recently read N.K. Jemisin's Great Cities trilogy first book, which was The City We Became, and I love the premise of that. It was so cool, but I don't think the next couple books are out, so don't know what I'm going to do while I'm waiting, but I thought the 5th season is known to be a fantastic fantasy trilogy, and I believe it takes place on another planet and deals with a lot of the sort of social ramifications of hierarchy in that society and kind of what happens. And N.K. Jemisin's definitely more of like a cross between a sci-fi and fantasy writer, whereas I feel like these other books that I mentioned are more pure fantasy, like take place on Earth, but like a fantasy world that's kind of built on top of Earth's world. And I'm sure that there's like a bookish word for that, but I don't know what it is because I'm still being, learning. I'm still learning. So anyway, that's another series that I'm super excited to read because I really enjoyed The City We Became, and which I will talk about in a future video. I have a plan for that. But yeah, I'm excited about that one, and this should be a fun journey for me, and I feel like these books will be a nice way to sort of break up some of the heavier reading that I do, because I do feel like at times reading heavy books back to back to back can become kind of taxing, and it can be difficult to actually read these books that make you feel a lot of things and make you think a lot back to back, and sometimes it can become a little tiring and you just sort of turn to watching Netflix in between. And I think it'll be fun to have a written outlet of just like entertainment rather than something that I have to watch necessarily to enjoy a just pure piece of entertainment. So I think this will be great for me, and I'm excited to incorporate more fantasy into my reading. And yeah, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment down below. Thank you so much for watching, as always, and I will see you guys next time. Have a good one. Bye bye.